My brother laughed while his groomsmen pointed at my faded hoodie. He told them I was just a jobless leech living off our parents. I kept my head down and my sleeves pulled low. The garment bags were heavy and my sleeve slipped. His best man caught sight of the jagged scar running up my wrist. He was an army ranger. He went completely white. He stood straight up and pulled out his phone without saying a single word. My brother asked what he was doing. 15 minutes later, the front doors flew open. I am Riley, 32 years old, and until that afternoon, my family thought I was nothing but a pathetic failure. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The air inside the Chicago tailor shop smelled of expensive cologne and polished leather. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the velvet couches. I stood near the fitting rooms wearing my oldest jeans and a plain gray hoodie. My arms ached from holding 5 heavy garment bags wrapped in thick plastic. I was only there because my parents demanded I make myself useful. They said I owed my brother a favor since they let me live in their guest house. Jason stood on the pedestal in the center of the room. He was 35 years old and the undisputed golden child of our family. 6 other men lounged on the furniture sipping complimentary whiskey. They were his groomsmen, all corporate climbers who looked at me like I was trash. Jason turned slightly to check the fit of his custom jacket. He glanced at me struggling with the heavy bags and smirked. He told his friends to ignore me, calling me his deadbeat sister who could not hold down a real job. The groomsmen chuckled in faux sympathy. I just stared at the polished hardwood floor. Jason loved playing the successful older brother burdened by a sibling who had failed at life. He loved telling people he was marrying Jada, an incredibly brilliant African-American woman whose father was a powerful senator in Washington. Jason wanted to impress her family so badly he was willing to step on anyone. He constantly reminded our parents that his wedding was the social event of the decade. My mother and father fed his ego every single day. They worshipped Jason and bragged about his banking career. Whenever someone asked about me, they would sigh and change the subject. They thought I was destitute. They had absolutely no idea I had spent years as a combat surgeon for a special operations team in the Middle East. They had no idea I was medically discharged after surviving a blast. And they certainly had no idea I was now the chief executive officer of a medical technology company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I kept my life completely secret from them because I knew how toxic their greed could be. I paid them rent anonymously through a management firm, but they convinced themselves they were doing me an act of charity. My arms began to tremble. The garment bags contained custom tuxedos for all the groomsmen and the hangers were digging into my palms. I shifted my weight to get a better grip. As I hoisted the bags higher, my left sleeve caught on the plastic zipper and slid all the way up to my elbow. The bright lights of the tailor shop illuminated my forearm. A massive jagged burn scar wrapped around my skin, twisting and knotting over the muscle. It was an ugly, violent mark left behind by an explosive device in Syria. I quickly reached over to pull the sleeve down, but I was not fast enough. Sitting on the couch closest to me was Liam. He was 32 years old, and Jason had chosen him as the best man because they went to the same university. But Liam was not an investment banker. He was an army ranger who had served multiple tours overseas. Liam was staring directly at my arm. The glass of whiskey in his hand stopped halfway to his mouth. All the color drained from his face. He looked at the scar, and then he looked up at my face. His eyes widened in absolute shock. He recognized the specific pattern of that injury. He recognized me. I had pulled him out of a burning transport vehicle 2 years ago. I had tied the tourniquet that saved his leg while enemy fire rained down around us. He had never known my real name because of security protocols, but he clearly remembered my face. And he definitely remembered the blast that had scarred my arm. Liam set his glass down on the table with a loud clank. He stood up slowly. His posture completely changed. He did not look like a groomsman anymore. He looked like a soldier standing at strict attention. The casual atmosphere evaporated instantly. Jason turned around. He asked Liam what was wrong. Jason laughed and told Liam not to let my ugly scar ruin his appetite. He said I probably burned myself cooking instant noodles. Liam did not laugh. He did not look at Jason. His eyes remained locked on me, filled with reverence. I gave him a subtle shake of my head, begging him to stay quiet. Liam ignored my plea. He pulled out his cell phone. He dialed a number without breaking eye contact. Jason stepped off the pedestal looking annoyed. He demanded to know what Liam was doing. Liam pressed the phone to his ear and spoke in a low, urgent voice. He requested an immediate secure transport. He said Aegis medical technology was required in Washington right now. Jason stared at him in confusion. I stood there holding the heavy bags, knowing my hidden life was about to explode. Jason let out a sharp, cruel laugh that bounced off the mirrored walls of the boutique. He stepped down from the fitting pedestal and adjusted the cuffs of his expensive shirt. Jason asked Liam exactly who he was calling to deal with the freeloader. He joked that I was not worth the price of a local cab ride, let alone an emergency phone call. Jason smirked at his groomsmen, expecting them to join in his mockery. A few of them offered weak chuckles, but the heavy tension in the room made their laughter sound hollow. Liam completely ignored my brother. He did not even blink. He kept the phone pressed to his ear and his eyes remained locked on my face. The expression in his eyes was one of deep, absolute reverence. It was the look of a soldier who had just found his commanding officer alive after believing she was gone forever. I gave him a subtle shake of my head. I widened my eyes slightly, pleading with him to stay quiet. I wanted to de-escalate the situation before my carefully hidden life was exposed to my toxic family. I had spent 2 years building a wall between my reality and their greed. I was not ready for that wall to come crashing down in the middle of a menswear store. Liam saw my silent plea, but his jaw remained set. He lowered his phone just an inch. He whispered into the receiver, speaking in a low, urgent tone that did not carry across the room. Jason scoffed again. His fake smile vanished, replaced by the familiar, arrogant sneer he reserved for anyone who dared to ignore him. He walked over to Liam and clapped him aggressively on the shoulder. He told Liam to stop messing around and hang up the phone. He complained that this fitting was costing him a fortune and he needed everything to be flawless. Jason loved hearing himself talk. He turned away from Liam and began a loud, dramatic rant about the immense pressure he was under. He paced across the expensive hardwood floor, complaining that his wedding was not just a simple family gathering. He reminded everyone in the room that he was marrying Jada. He spoke her name like it was a royal title that elevated his own status. Jada was 30 years old and easily the most brilliant woman I had ever met. She was an African-American lawyer who came from a long line of old money and immense political power. Jason was utterly obsessed with her pedigree. He needed this marriage to secure his place in high society. He pointed an accusing finger at me while he continued his rant. He told his friends that Jada came from a family of true elites. He bragged loudly that her father was Senator Winston. He made sure to emphasize every single syllable when he announced that Senator Winston was also a former Deputy Secretary of Defense. Jason said he was marrying into a political dynasty, and he could not afford to have a loser sister dragging down his carefully crafted image. He claimed that Jada and her father expected absolute perfection from him. He said Senator Winston was a man who demanded excellence and power from everyone in his inner circle. Jason was desperately trying to impress the senator. He needed the political connections and the massive financial backing that came with marrying into the powerful family of Jada. I stood quietly gripping the plastic covers of the custom suits. My arms burned from the weight of the garments, but my anger burned hotter. Jason was using Jada. She was a genuinely kind and highly intelligent woman who deserved someone far better than my narcissistic brother. Jason was only marrying her to climb the social ladder. He wanted unrestricted access to the lucrative defense industry networks that Senator Winston commanded. It was incredibly ironic. Jason was desperately trying to kiss up to a former Deputy Secretary of Defense while standing in the same room as the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Medical Tech. My company supplied the exact military technology that Senator Winston had spent his entire career championing in Washington. Jason walked right up to me, invading my personal space. He lowered his voice to a harsh, aggressive whisper. He told me I was a walking embarrassment. He said my faded jeans and my cheap gray hoodie made him look incredibly bad in front of his wealthy friends. He demanded that I drop the heavy garment bags on the floor and wait outside in the rain until they were completely finished. He said I was lucky he even allowed me to breathe the same air as his groomsmen. He told me I would never understand what it takes to operate at his level of success. He bragged that he was a top-tier investment banker handling millions of dollars for exclusive clients. He said I was just a pathetic high school graduate who lived in our parents' backyard. I looked him directly in the eye. I did not flinch or look away. I did not cry. The weak girl who used to cry over his cruel insults had died on a battlefield in Syria. I told Jason to step back. My voice was calm and completely void of emotion. The flat, dangerous tone of my voice surprised him. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, but his massive ego quickly took over again. He raised his hand as if he was going to shove me toward the front door. Before he could even twitch a muscle, Liam stepped between us. Liam moved with a sudden explosive speed that shocked the entire room. He placed his solid, muscular frame directly in front of me, shielding me from my brother. Liam glared at Jason with absolute disgust. He told my brother to back away immediately. Before Jason could utter another arrogant insult, the heavy glass doors of the tailor shop flew open. The sudden noise made everyone jump. 3 armored government sport utility vehicles sat idling right outside on the Chicago street. Their dark-tinted windows and flashing hazard lights commanded immediate attention. 2 high-ranking Pentagon officials wearing full-dress uniforms stepped inside the boutique. They bypassed the shocked groomsmen completely. They marched straight toward me and stopped perfectly synchronized. Both officials snapped a crisp military salute. One of them spoke in a loud, clear voice. He called me Dr. Riley. He announced that the transport helicopter was fueled and ready. He stated that the presence of the Aegis Medical Tech Chief Executive Officer was urgently required in Washington for a classified briefing. Jason dropped his champagne glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor. His mouth hung open in stunned silence. I ignored his shock. I calmly grabbed my jacket from the nearest chair. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a solid black corporate American Express card. I tossed it onto the glass checkout counter with a sharp clack. I told the shop owner to pay for all their cheap suits. I ordered him to send the final receipt directly to the Aegis accounting department. I turned my back on my brother and walked out the door, escorted by heavily armed military security. Exactly 1 month later, the tension returned. We were at the ultra-exclusive rehearsal dinner hosted at a 5-star restaurant downtown. The massive dining room sparkled with chandeliers and expensive floral arrangements. The venue was packed with elite politicians, wealthy investors, and high society figures connected to Senator Winston. Jada looked elegant in a white silk dress, greeting her powerful family members. I walked through the arched entryway, wearing a simple tailored black dress. I only attended because I respected Jada and did not want my absence to cause unnecessary drama. My parents, Richard and Diane, spotted me the absolute second I crossed the threshold. They did not smile. They did not welcome me. Diane marched across the marble floor with lightning speed. She grabbed my upper arm with a painful, pinching grip. Richard flanked my other side, blocking me from the view of the important guests. They dragged me away from the grand dining hall. They forced me down a narrow, dimly lit hallway. They shoved me roughly into a cramped corner table located right next to the swinging kitchen doors. The table was small, wobbly, and completely hidden from the rest of the elegant party. Waiters rushed past us carrying trays of expensive champagne, nearly hitting my chair. Diane leaned over the tiny table. Her face was flushed with intense anger. She hissed at me, keeping her voice low so the wealthy guests would not hear her vicious tone. She accused me of trying to sabotage her perfect son. She asked me how much money I wasted hiring those actors in military uniforms. She completely convinced herself that the Pentagon officials at the tailor shop were just cheap performers I had paid to embarrass Jason. Richard crossed his arms and glared at me with absolute contempt. He told me my little stunt was pathetic. Diane pointed a shaking finger at my face. She reminded me that I had been hiding in their backyard guest house for 2 entire years since I returned from the Middle East. She said I was nothing but a broken, destitute veteran who could not even afford basic rent. She mocked my quiet lifestyle. She claimed my time in the military had made me mentally unstable and completely delusional. She told me I was sick in the head for inventing a fake medical technology company just to feel important. She said I was a charity case. She bragged that she and Richard had graciously allowed me to live on their property out of sheer pity. They truly believed I spent my days staring at the walls, traumatized and broke. They had no idea I was running a global defense contractor from my secure home office. I sat quietly in my uncomfortable chair. I did not raise my voice. I did not try to correct their massive delusions. I just stared at my mother while she continued her hateful rant. Diane warned me to stay hidden in this dark corner for the entire evening. She forbade me from speaking to Senator Winston or any of his distinguished colleagues. She said my presence alone was a stain on the family reputation. She told me I was a failure who could never measure up to Jason and his brilliant career in investment banking. Richard chimed in, demanding that I keep my mouth shut and eat my dinner in silence. He warned me that if I did anything to ruin this rehearsal dinner, he would throw all my belongings out of the guest house by morning. He said they were tired of supporting a grown woman who refused to contribute to society. I looked at Richard and Diane with pure, icy calm. They were so blinded by their obsession with wealth and status that they could not see the truth standing right in front of them. They assumed my silence was submission. They thought my simple clothes meant poverty. They believed their golden child was a financial genius while considering me a miserable burden. I slowly reached for my water glass and took a calm sip. I knew Jason was drowning in massive debt. I knew he was desperately trying to use this prestigious wedding to save himself from total ruin. I was perfectly content to sit in the shadows near the kitchen doors and watch his carefully constructed house of cards collapse. The dinner service officially began. I remained at my isolated table listening to the clatter of dishes and arrogant laughter of my brother echoing from the main room. Jason was in his element. He wanted to project the image of a fearless titan of industry. I watched through the narrow gap between the swinging kitchen doors as he signaled the head sommelier. Jason spoke loudly, ensuring Senator Winston and every other distinguished guest could hear his extravagant demands. He ordered 5 bottles of a notoriously rare French vintage. He did not even glance at the menu price. He simply waved his hand with practiced arrogance. Next came the food. Jason sent back the standard rehearsal dinner menu. He demanded imported Wagyu beef for the entire head table. He ordered caviar service and white truffles. The restaurant manager scrambled to accommodate the sudden requests. Senator Winston sat quietly observing my brother with a guarded expression. Jada looked slightly uncomfortable with the excessive display of wealth, but Jason placed a reassuring hand on her arm. He played the role of the generous billionaire perfectly. I toasted to their future boasting about his massive investment portfolio. The waiters rushed back and forth past my tiny corner table, carrying silver trays loaded with culinary extravagance. The scent of roasted wagyu and rich wine drifted into the hallway. I quietly ate my simple chicken dinner and drank tap water. I knew the reality behind his performance. Investment bankers at his level made good money, but they did not casually drop tens of thousands of dollars on a Tuesday night rehearsal dinner unless they were trying to hide something. Jason was overcompensating. He was desperate to prove he belonged in the same social stratosphere as a former Deputy Secretary of Defense. 2 hours later, the extravagant feast started winding down. The waiters cleared the empty plates and presented delicate dessert trays. I kept my eyes focused on the main room. The general manager approached the head table holding a sleek black leather folder. He placed it discreetly next to my brother. Jason did not miss a beat. He flashed a brilliant smile at Jada and her father. He casually reached for his wallet and pulled out a platinum credit card. He handed it to the manager without even opening the folder to check the total. The manager bowed slightly and walked away toward the payment terminal near the hallway where I sat. I watched the manager swipe the platinum card. The machine beeped a sharp negative sound. The manager frowned and swiped it again. Another sharp beep, declined. The manager printed a small slip of paper and walked back to the head table. He leaned down and whispered a message to my brother. Jason lost his smile for a fraction of a second. He quickly recovered, letting out a loud booming laugh. He told the table that his bank must have flagged the large transaction for fraud protection because he traveled so much. He pulled out a second credit card and handed it over. The manager returned to the terminal. He swiped the second card. Declined. He tried a third time. Declined. The total glowing on the digital screen of the terminal was $45,000. The vintage wine alone accounted for more than half of the massive bill. The manager walked back to the table again. This time he did not whisper, he simply shook his head. Jason instantly broke out in a cold sweat. The color drained from his face. His carefully constructed billionaire persona started cracking under the intense pressure. Senator Winston raised an eyebrow. The senator offered to cover the bill himself. He reached for his jacket pocket, but Jason panicked. He shot up from his chair, waving his hands frantically. He insisted he would handle it. He told the senator he just needed to call his private wealth manager to clear the security hold on his accounts. He excused himself from the table with a tight, forced smile. He turned away from his wealthy guests and power walked toward the back hallway. As soon as he crossed the threshold out of the main dining room, his entire demeanor changed. The fake smile vanished. His chest heaved as he gasped for air. He tugged violently at his silk tie, trying to loosen the collar of his expensive dress shirt. He looked like a cornered animal. He paced back and forth in the narrow corridor, right next to my hidden table. He pulled out his phone and frantically opened his banking applications. I sat perfectly still, watching the utter panic consume him. He cursed under his breath, swiping desperately across his phone screen. Every single account was overdrawn or maxed out. His massive house of cards was collapsing in real time. He ran his shaking hands through his perfectly styled hair. He looked up and suddenly made eye contact with me. Jason lunged toward my tiny table. He grabbed the back of my wooden chair and leaned down. His breath smelled of stale wine and sheer terror. He demanded my help. His voice was a harsh, frantic whisper. He told me I needed to give him my credit card right this second. He reminded me about the black American Express card I had thrown on the tailor shop counter a month ago. He insisted it must be a fake prop or a prepaid debit card given to me by my supposedly fictional employer. I did not care where I got it. He just needed it to work. He told me the restaurant bill was $45,000. He threatened to destroy my life if I did not hand over the card immediately. He said I owed him for letting me live rent-free on his family property. He grabbed my wrist, digging his fingers into my skin, right next to my blast scar. He commanded me to use my fake black card to save him from absolute ruin. He promised he would pay the balance tomorrow after he moved some money around. He lied straight to my face, knowing he had absolutely zero liquid assets. I stared at his desperate, sweating face. The golden child of our family was begging the worthless scapegoat for a massive financial bailout. He was completely trapped in a nightmare of his own making. I did not pull my arm away. I just looked at him with icy calm, waiting for his entire world to burn. I slowly peeled his shaking fingers off my wrist one by one. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of fear. I reached into the hidden pocket of my dress and pulled out the solid black corporate American Express card. The same card that had terrified his best man a month ago. I held it between my index and middle finger, holding it just out of his frantic reach. I told him I would pay the bill. I told him I would save him from the absolute humiliation of facing his future father-in-law without a dime to his name. The sheer relief that washed over his face was pathetic. He let out a loud breath and wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. He started babbling about how he would wire me the money tomorrow morning. He lied and said his funds were just tied up in an offshore investment vehicle. I ignored his pathetic excuses. I signaled the restaurant manager, who was hovering nervously at the edge of the hallway. The manager approached us with cautious steps, holding the electronic payment terminal like it was a live grenade. I handed him the black card. He inserted it into the machine. The terminal processed the $45,000 transaction instantly. A long white receipt printed out with a soft humming sound. The manager let out a sigh of relief. He handed me a silver pen to sign the merchant copy. I scribbled my signature and handed it back. Jason immediately puffed out his chest. The color returned to his face and his arrogant posture snapped right back into place. He patted his tailored suit jacket and flashed a fake confident smile at the manager. He loudly thanked the manager for being patient with the supposed security fraud alert on his platinum cards. The manager simply nodded politely and turned toward the main waiter station to file the receipt. Jason turned back to me. His voice dropped back into that nasty, aggressive whisper. He ordered me to get out of the restaurant before Jada or her family saw me. He told me to go back to the dark corner and disappear. Before I could even respond, a booming voice echoed down the narrow hallway. Senator Winston had left the main dining room to stretch his legs. He was walking directly toward the waiter station located just a few feet away from where Jason and I stood. The senator was an imposing figure with broad shoulders and a sharp, calculating gaze that had dismantled political opponents in Washington for decades. The restaurant manager was currently standing at the high counter of the waiter station. He was organizing the signed VIP receipts. Senator Winston paused near the counter to adjust his watch. His sharp eyes naturally drifted downward toward the paperwork. He saw the long white receipt I had just signed. The bold black ink at the top of the slip was impossible to miss. It clearly displayed the corporate account details. It read, Aegis Medical Tech, followed immediately by the title, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, and then, my name. Senator Winston froze completely. His eyes widened in absolute shock. He leaned closer to the counter just to make sure he was reading it correctly. He was a former Deputy Secretary of Defense. He knew exactly what Aegis Medical Tech was. My company had just finalized a massive billion-dollar defense contract to supply advanced battlefield trauma kits to the military. Senator Winston had personally championed that specific contract during his time in office. He knew the name of the elusive founder who rarely made public appearances. Senator Winston picked up the receipt from the counter. The manager tried to stop him, but the senator held up a hand demanding silence. He turned around holding the piece of paper. His calculating gaze locked onto Jason and then shifted to me. He took a slow, deliberate step toward us. He looked at my simple black dress and then looked back at the $45,000 charge on the paper. He asked my brother what was going on. I demanded to know why the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Medical Tech was standing in the back hallway of a restaurant paying for a rehearsal dinner. The air in the corridor turned ice cold. Jason went completely rigid. His eyes darted frantically between the senator and the receipt. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The fake billionaire facade he had carefully built was crumbling again. Senator Winston took another step forward. He addressed me directly. He asked if I was the brilliant doctor who had developed the new rapid clotting technology for the armed forces. Jason panicked. He completely lost his mind. He jumped directly between me and Senator Winston, waving his hands in a frantic, desperate motion. He let out a loud, forced laugh that sounded like a dying animal. He told the senator there was a massive misunderstanding. Jason pointed at me and lied straight to the face of a powerful political veteran. He claimed I was definitely not the chief executive officer of anything. He told the senator I was just his deadbeat younger sister. He frantically explained that I was merely a low-level secretary running errands for the real executives at Aegis. He claimed the company simply gave me a corporate card to pick up coffee and pay for random office supplies. He spun a ridiculous story about how I was abusing company resources to help him out with a temporary bank glitch. He promised the senator that I was nobody important. He called me a glorified assistant who just happened to share the same first name as the founder. Jason was literally digging his own grave with every single word he spoke. He begged the senator to ignore me and just return to the main dining hall. He desperately prayed the powerful man would believe him. Senator Winston stared at my brother with a cold, calculating expression. The veteran politician did not become a defense official by falling for frantic lies. He looked down at the receipt in his hand and then back up at Jason. He did not yell or cause a scene. He simply folded the slip of paper and slid it into his tailored suit jacket. He told Jason they would have a very long conversation about corporate spending later. The senator turned on his heel and walked back toward the main dining hall, leaving my brother shaking in the corridor. The second the heavy wooden door swung shut, Jason completely lost his mind. He lunged at me, grabbing my upper arm. His grip was bruising and desperate. Suddenly, my parents appeared from the shadows of the hallway. Richard and Diane had been watching the entire exchange unfold from a distance. They flanked my sides instantly, forming a physical wall around me. Diane hissed at me to keep my mouth shut. Richard placed his heavy hand on my shoulder and shoved me forward. They marched me away from the waiter station and down a secondary hallway. They pushed me into a small private dining room used for storing extra chairs and coats. The room was dark and smelled of lemon polish and dust. Richard slammed the solid oak door behind us, turning the lock with a sharp click. Jason paced the small room like a trapped animal. He tugged at his hair and muttered curses under his breath. Diane stood with her back against the door, acting as a guard. Richard pulled a folded stack of papers from his inner jacket pocket. He threw the papers onto a small wooden table in the center of the room. He slammed a heavy gold pen down right next to the documents. He ordered me to sit down and read. I stood perfectly still. I looked at the papers. The bold black letters at the top clearly read Non-Disclosure and Asset Reassignment Agreement. I looked back at my father. I asked him what this was supposed to be. Jason stopped pacing and pointed a trembling finger at my face. He told me it was my only way out of this mess. He demanded I sign the document immediately. He said the contract legally stated that he was the true financial backer of Aegis Medical Tech. He wanted me to sign away my entire origin story. The document claimed he was the anonymous angel investor who had single-handedly funded my company from the very beginning. It stated I was merely the medical face of the operation while he pulled all the strings behind the scenes. I let out a short, hollow laugh. I asked him why I would ever sign a fraudulent legal document giving him credit for my own blood, sweat, and tears. Diane stepped forward, her face twisted into a mask of pure desperation. She told me I owed it to the family. She said Jason was carrying the entire weight of our legacy on his shoulders. Richard slammed his fist against the table, demanding my compliance. He finally admitted the ugly truth they had been hiding for months. Jason was completely bankrupt. My supposedly brilliant brother had been making incredibly reckless trades on the stock market. He had leveraged millions of dollars in aggressive margin calls and lost absolutely everything. Richard confessed that Jason was drowning in catastrophic debt. He owed massive sums of money to very dangerous institutional creditors. His entire investment portfolio was completely fraudulent. The luxurious suits, the expensive cars, and the elite country club memberships were all financed on credit he could never repay. Jason stepped closer, his eyes wide and frantic. He admitted that marrying Jada was his only lifeline. He said her political family possessed the immense wealth and influence needed to save him from federal prison. But Senator Winston was an extremely cautious man. The senator had been demanding to see proof of my brother's private investments before finalizing any trusts associated with the marriage. Jason needed a legitimate high-value asset to show his future father-in-law. He needed Aegis Medical Tech. He planned to use my booming defense company to legitimize his completely fabricated financial portfolio. If he could prove he was my primary investor, the senator would back off and the marriage would secure his rescue. Jason pleaded with me, dropping his arrogant facade. He said if I did not sign the paper, the wedding would be canceled and he would be utterly destroyed by morning. Diane grabbed my hands, trying to force the pen into my fingers. She begged me to be a good sister. She cried real tears, claiming that my selfish refusal would ruin her perfect son. She reminded me that they gave me a place to live when I returned from the military, broken and exhausted. She tried to manipulate my sense of loyalty, insisting that true family protected each other at all costs. Richard loomed over me, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me into submission. He told me Aegis did not need my name attached to it. He said I could still run the medical side of the business, while Jason handled the public glory. They honestly believed I was weak enough to surrender my life's work just to maintain their fake social standing. I dropped the gold pen onto the floor. I watched it roll under a stack of extra chairs. I looked at the three people who were supposed to be my family. They were not asking for a favor. They were demanding I commit corporate fraud to cover up their own catastrophic failures. I told Jason his financial crimes were not my problem. I told Diane her blind favoritism had created a monster. I told Richard his intimidation tactics no longer worked on a woman who had survived active combat zones. Jason let out a guttural scream of pure frustration. He slammed his hands flat on the wooden table, sending the unassigned contract scattering. His chest heaved as he glared at me with absolute hatred. He said I was making the biggest mistake of my life. He said I owed him this signature because I was nothing but a broken veteran living on his charity. He took a menacing step toward me, raising his voice until it shook the walls of the tiny storage room. He declared that if I did not pick up that gold pen and sign my name right this second, I would not have a roof over my head by midnight. He threatened to drive straight back to the family estate and throw every piece of my belongings onto the front lawn. He vividly described how he would drag my mattress out into the cold mud and toss my clothes into the street. He told me I would be sleeping in a wet cardboard box under a dark bridge before the sun came up. Diane immediately nodded in agreement, standing tall beside him. She crossed her arms and told me her son was not bluffing. She said they had been too generous, letting me hide in their guest house for the last 2 years. She claimed I had abused their hospitality and disrespected their golden child. Richard stepped closer, blocking the only exit. He told me I had exactly 1 minute to decide between signing the document or becoming a homeless vagrant. He said they would call the police and report me for trespassing if I dared to step foot on their property again. They honestly believed this was their ultimate leverage. They thought the threat of homelessness would instantly break my spirit and force me into submission. They thought they held all the power today. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I stood perfectly still with my hands resting calmly at my sides. The desperation radiating from my family was palpable. They were trying to use intimidation tactics that would not frighten a child, let alone a woman who had performed emergency surgery while mortar shells shattered the earth around her. I looked at Jason and felt nothing but profound pity. He was a weak, pathetic man throwing a temper tantrum because his elaborate lies were catching up to him. I was sweating profusely, and his custom-tailored suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume. I let the silence stretch out, allowing their desperate threats to hang in the stale air. I wanted them to commit to their aggressive stance before I dismantled it. I finally spoke, keeping my voice dangerously low and completely steady. I told Jason that threatening to throw me out of the guest house was a very interesting choice of leverage. I told him he was acting as if he actually had the authority to evict anyone. Jason scoffed loudly and puffed out his chest. He reminded me that the guest house belonged to our parents, and since he was the primary financial provider for the family, he called the shots. He bragged that he paid the property taxes and funded the maintenance. He said the estate was practically his already. I let a small, cold smile form on my lips. I told him his memory seemed to be failing him because his actions from 1 year ago told a very different story. Jason froze. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a flash of confusion. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. I asked him if he remembered a rainy Tuesday night last October. I asked him if he remembered telling Jada he was working late at the bank when he was actually driving through the suburbs in a rented sedan. Richard and Diane exchanged bewildered glances, completely lost in the sudden shift of conversation. I kept my eyes locked directly on my brother. I told him I knew exactly what he did that night. I told him I knew he bypassed the main gate of the family estate and parked down the street to avoid being seen by our parents. I told him I knew he crept through the wet grass and used a crowbar to pry open the back window of my guest house. The color drained from Jason, leaving him looking like a ghost. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping into the table. He opened his mouth to deny it, but I cut him off immediately. I told him he broke into my home office because he was drowning in margin calls and desperately searching for anything he could sell. I told him he thought I was just a crazy veteran hoarding military disability checks in a shoebox. He had no idea he was breaking into the remote headquarters of Aegis Medical Tech. I described how he tore through my desk drawers and knocked over my bookshelves looking for cash. I told him I knew he eventually found the locked filing cabinet in the corner. Jason started shaking visibly. He looked at Richard and Diane, pleading for them to intervene, but they were too stunned to speak. I stepped closer, completely invading his personal space. I told him I knew he spent an hour cracking that filing cabinet open. I told him I knew exactly what he found inside. He did not find a shoebox full of cash. He found the highly confidential origin blueprints and advanced business plans for a revolutionary medical trauma kit. He found the exact documents outlining the future of Aegis medical tech. I told him he realized those blueprints were worth millions to the right investors. I told him he stole those documents, stuffed them into his jacket, and climbed back out the window. He thought he committed the perfect crime because he assumed I was clueless. He was entirely wrong. I told him he left physical evidence all over my office. I told him I had completely documented his little break-in as it happened. I reached into the pocket of my simple black dress and pulled out my smartphone. The screen illuminated the dim storage room, casting a harsh white glow across my brother's terrified face. I did not break eye contact as I swiped past my lock screen and opened a secure cloud application. I tapped a specific video file labeled Guest House Security Breach. I turned the screen around and held it up right in front of his nose. I pressed play. The video started with crystal clear night vision footage from the concealed camera I had installed directly above my desk. Jason watched himself on the screen. He watched his digital ghost pry open the filing cabinet with a crowbar. He watched himself frantically flip through the thick stacks of paper. He watched himself pause when he saw the Aegis Medical Tech logo printed bold and black across the confidential blueprints. The camera angle was absolutely perfect. It captured every single detail of his desperate, greedy expression as he realized he had struck gold. Richard and Diane leaned closer to look at the screen. My mother covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a muffled gasp. My father squinted at the bright display, his heavy jaw dropping open in utter disbelief. They were witnessing their golden child committing a blatant felony. I narrated the video for them, just in case the high-definition footage was not clear enough. I explained how Jason carefully photographed every single page of my proprietary combat trauma kit designs. I explained how he stuffed the original folders into his jacket and sneaked back out into the rainy night. I paused the video on a clear freeze frame of his face, looking directly toward the camera lens without even realizing it was there. Jason swatted at my hand, trying to knock the phone away. I simply pulled it back and slipped it securely into my pocket. He stammered out a weak denial, claiming the video was doctored or fake. I laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that cut right through his pathetic lies. I told him he was insulting my intelligence. I explained that stealing the physical documents was only the first part of his massive crime. I told him I knew exactly what he did with those blueprints the very next morning. I had tracked his digital footprint. I had monitored the financial moves he made using my stolen intellectual property. I stepped forward, forcing him to retreat until his back hit the cold wooden door. I spoke clearly, ensuring my parents heard every single word. I revealed that Jason took my advanced medical technology plans to a group of shady, unregulated institutional lenders. He presented my life's work as his own brilliant creation. He used my highly classified military designs to secure massive fraudulent loans under his own personal name. He convinced those aggressive creditors that he was an anonymous tech genius on the verge of launching a billion-dollar defense company. He promised them astronomical returns on their investment. They gave him millions of dollars in cash based entirely on the stolen Aegis blueprints. And because Jason was an arrogant fool with a severe gambling addiction, he immediately dumped all that borrowed money into highly volatile stock market trades, hoping to double it. He lost every single penny within a week. Richard let out a strangled groan, clutching his chest. Diane started sobbing loudly, realizing her perfect son was a massive criminal. Jason stood frozen, his eyes wide and completely devoid of sanity. The truth was finally out in the open, and it was incredibly ugly. He had not just made a few bad investments. He had committed severe corporate espionage and massive financial fraud. He owed millions to dangerous people, and his only collateral was a stolen idea he did not even understand. The sudden silence in the room shattered when Jason exploded. The last shred of his fake billionaire persona completely disintegrated. He let out a deafening roar of pure narcissistic rage. He grabbed the heavy wooden chair next to him and violently hurled it across the room. It smashed against the far wall, splintering into several pieces. Diane screamed and shrank back against Richard. Jason lunged forward, his face twisted into a grotesque mask of absolute fury. His veins bulged against his neck. He screamed that I was a liar and a monster. He screamed that he deserved those plans because he was the smart one, the successful one, the one who was supposed to carry the family legacy. He yelled that my military service was a joke and my company was nothing but a fluke. Spit flew from his lips as he continued his unhinged tirade. He pointed a shaking finger directly between my eyes. He declared war. He screamed that he would destroy me. He promised he would make me suffer for humiliating him. He said he would ruin my reputation and tear down my company piece by piece. He screamed that nobody would ever believe a scarred, broken veteran over a respected investment banker. He demanded that I hand over full control of Aegis immediately or face total annihilation. I stood my ground completely unfazed by his pathetic temper tantrum. I had faced enemy combatants who were far more terrifying than a desperate man in a tailored suit. Jason realized his screaming was not working. He changed his tactic, returning to his favorite threat. He stormed toward the door, his hands balled into tight fists. He looked back at me with a crazed, frantic glint in his eye. He swore on his life that he would have me violently thrown out of the guest house by morning. He screamed that he would personally drag my belongings into the street and set them on fire. He promised I would be sleeping in the gutter, begging for spare change while he married Jada and secured his absolute power. He declared that tomorrow would be the worst day of my life. The harsh morning sunlight pierced through the blinds of the guest house. I sat calmly at my kitchen island, sipping black coffee. I had packed a single duffel bag, not because I was running away, but because I was preparing for the final phase of my plan. Outside, the heavy tires of squad cars crunched against the gravel driveway. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the manicured hedges of the estate. Jason had actually done it. He had convinced our parents to call the local authorities to throw me out into the street the day before his high society wedding. I took another slow sip of my coffee, listening to the heavy boots marching up the wooden steps of my porch. A loud, aggressive knock rattled the front door. I did not rush. I walked over and pulled the handle open, revealing two uniformed police officers standing shoulder to shoulder. Behind them, my parents waited on the perfectly trimmed lawn. Diane immediately launched into a spectacular performance. The moment the door opened, she collapsed against my father, burying her face in his chest and wailing loudly. Her theatrical sobs carried across the expansive neighborhood. The sprawling mansions nearby had massive windows, and the wealthy neighbors were already stepping out onto their balconies to watch the drama unfold. Diane pointed a shaking finger at me and screamed that I was a dangerous squatter. She told the police officers that I had forced my way into their guest house and refused to leave. She cried out that I was stealing from them, draining their retirement funds, and threatening her perfect son, right before his wedding day. Richard wrapped his arms around his weeping wife, playing the role of the protective patriarch. He told the officers that I was a deeply disturbed military veteran who had lost my grip on reality. He claimed they had tried to help me out of charity, but my violent tendencies had finally pushed them too far. The neighbors gathered closer to their property lines, holding their morning coffee mugs, and whispering among themselves. They were the elite of Chicago society, including corporate executives and media moguls. Diane wanted an audience, and she certainly had one. She wailed louder, making sure every single person in the cul-de-sac heard her vicious lies. She screamed that I was a parasite who had stolen valuable documents from my brother. She flipped the narrative entirely, claiming Jason was the victim of my jealous rage. She begged the police to arrest me and haul me away in handcuffs so her family could finally have peace. The officers looked at me with a mixture of caution and pity. They had responded to a domestic disturbance call regarding a hostile trespasser. They expected to find a frantic, erratic individual. Instead, they found a perfectly calm woman standing quietly in the doorway holding a ceramic coffee mug. The older officer stepped forward, resting his hand near his utility belt. He addressed me in a firm, authoritative tone. He stated that the property owners had officially revoked their permission for me to reside on the premises. He explained that I had exactly 10 minutes to gather my personal belongings and vacate the guest house immediately. If I refused to comply, he warned that I would be arrested for criminal trespassing and escorted off the estate in restraints. Richard smirked behind the officers. He shouted that 10 minutes was too generous. He demanded they drag me out right now. He yelled that my presence was a toxic infection on their pristine property. Diane sobbed into her hands, nodding vigorously in agreement. They felt so incredibly powerful standing behind the badges of local law enforcement. They believed they had successfully humiliated me in front of their elite peers and secured their complete victory. I did not raise my voice or show any signs of distress. I simply looked at the police officers and asked for the lead officer by name. I read his name tag and addressed him respectfully. I told him I understood he was just responding to a dispatch call based on the information provided by the individuals standing on the lawn. I explained that I had absolutely no intention of causing a public disturbance or making his job difficult. I set my coffee mug down on the entryway table. The younger officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs, anticipating a struggle based on my parents' frantic descriptions. I completely ignored the metallic clinking sound. I kept my eyes locked on the older officer. I informed him that the individuals screaming on the lawn had deliberately filed a false police report. I stated that they did not possess the legal authority to evict anyone from this property. Diane shrieked in mock horror, yelling that my mind was completely gone. She screamed to the wealthy neighbors that I was suffering from severe delusions today. Richard stepped forward, his face red with fabricated outrage, telling the officers to stop listening to my insane ramblings right now. He shouted that he possessed the deed to the estate and wanted me removed by force immediately. The older officer held up his hand, demanding silence from my father. He looked back at me and asked me to explain my statement, warning that making false claims to law enforcement would escalate my legal troubles. I nodded in absolute agreement. I told the officer I fully understood the severe consequences of lying to authorities. I invited him to step inside my home office for exactly 1 minute so I could retrieve a certified document. I promised him that everything he needed to resolve this dispute was sitting inside a secure fireproof safe. I turned around and walked down the short hallway. The older officer followed while his partner waited outside. I was ready to show them the absolute truth. My greedy parents were about to face legal devastation. Their crafted lies would shatter in 1 single second. I led the older officer into my home office. The room was immaculate and sharply contrasted the chaotic scene unfolding on the front lawn. The officer stood by the doorway, keeping a watchful eye on me. He told me he did not want any trouble today. He instructed me to grab a duffel bag and pack only my basic essentials. He said the property owners were absolutely determined to see me removed, and he had to enforce their legal rights. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or offer a single word of protest. I walked past my wooden desk and approached the large bookshelf resting against the far wall. I pushed a hidden latch and a section of the shelving swung open silently. Hidden behind the false wall was a massive biometric fireproof safe. His posture stiffened as he watched me place my thumb against the glowing green scanner. The heavy metal door unlocked with a deep mechanical clank. I did not reach for clothes or a duffel bag. I bypassed the stacks of emergency cash and encrypted hard drives. I reached into the top compartment and pulled out a thick, certified red folder. I turned around and walked straight back over to the officer. I extended my arm and handed the red folder directly to him. I told him to read the first 3 pages before he decided to put me in handcuffs. I told him those documents contained the absolute legal truth about the property we were standing on. The officer hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking the folder from my hands. He flipped open the heavy red cover. His eyes immediately darted across the bold legal print. As he began scanning the paragraphs, the chaotic situation outside suddenly escalated. A sleek black Mercedes sedan pulled smoothly into the grand circular driveway of the estate. The driver parked right behind the idling police cruisers. The car door opened and Jada stepped out. She was wearing a flawless designer suit and carrying a thick stack of gold-embossed wedding schedules. She had driven over to personally deliver the final weekend itineraries to my parents. Jada froze the absolute second her designer heels hit the gravel. She stared in utter horror at the flashing police lights illuminating the manicured hedges. She saw the wealthy neighbors standing on their pristine lawns whispering and pointing. Jada immediately spotted Diane performing her theatrical sobbing routine in the middle of the yard. She saw Richard standing nearby with his chest puffed out, barking orders at the younger police officer. Jada clutched the wedding schedules tightly against her chest. She is a highly intelligent corporate lawyer who comes from a powerful political dynasty. Her brilliant mind instantly recognized that something was deeply wrong with this picture. This was not the dignified elite family Jason had aggressively sold to her. This was a messy public disaster unfolding right in front of the entire neighborhood. Jada marched across the lawn with sharp, deliberate steps. She approached my father and demanded to know exactly what was happening at the guest house. Richard spun around and his face instantly lost all its color. He completely panicked, seeing his future daughter-in-law standing amidst the chaos. He rushed over to her, waving his hands in a frantic, desperate attempt to perform immediate damage control. He plastered a fake, reassuring smile across his sweating face. He lied smoothly, claiming they were just dealing with a minor security issue. He told Jada they had discovered a dangerous squatter hiding in the guest house and had called the authorities to handle the garbage. Jada narrowed her sharp eyes. She looked past Richard and stared directly at the front door of my guest house. She knew I lived there. Jason had repeatedly told her that the guest house was part of their massive multi-generational family estate. He had bragged that his parents generously allowed his disabled veteran sister to live there out of pure charity. Jada looked back at Richard. Her legal instincts flared, taking in his excessive sweating, and Diane acting completely unhinged on the grass. The chaotic scene deeply unsettled her. She felt the sudden urge to call her father, Senator Winston, and delay the wedding. Back inside my quiet home office, the police chief continued reading the documents inside the certified red folder. His brow furrowed deeply. He flipped to the second page, checking the official state seals and the notarized signatures at the bottom of the legal forms. He flipped to the third page, tracing his index finger along the property boundaries listed in the county deeds. The air in the room grew completely still. The officer slowly closed the red folder. He looked up at me. His entire demeanor shifted from authoritative enforcement to absolute bewilderment. The officer looked down at the folder and then looked back at my calm face. He let out a low whistle of pure disbelief. I stood there with absolute confidence, waiting for his assessment. I knew exactly what those papers proved. The documents clearly outlined the undeniable financial history of the entire estate. They contained the original bank foreclosure notices served to Richard and Diane 2 years ago. They contained the absolute proof of their catastrophic bankruptcy. Most importantly, the red folder held the irrevocable cash purchase agreement. I asked the officer if he still wanted me to pack my bags. I asked him if he still believed the people screaming on the front lawn possessed the legal authority to throw me out into the street. The officer shook his head slowly. He handed the red folder back to me with a newfound look of profound respect. He apologized for the intrusion. He stated clearly that he now understood the exact nature of this dispute. He adjusted his duty belt and turned toward the front door. He told me he needed to have a very serious conversation with the individuals standing on the grass. The police chief turned on his heel and marched out of my home office. I followed closely behind him, clutching the certified red folder tightly against my chest. The bright morning sun blinded me for a fraction of a second as we stepped out onto the porch. Richard and Diane were standing on the manicured lawn with their chests puffed out in absolute triumph. Diane had miraculously stopped her theatrical sobbing. She wiped a fake tear from her cheek and plastered a smug, victorious smirk across her face. She honestly believed the chief was about to read me my rights. Richard took a bold, confident step forward, crossing his arms over his expensive cashmere sweater. He looked at the chief with an arrogant, expectant gleam in his eye. He loudly demanded to know why I was not wearing heavy steel handcuffs. He yelled to the watching neighbors that the neighborhood was finally safe from the violent squatter. He ordered the younger officer to go inside and start throwing my belongings onto the gravel driveway. The chief raised his right hand, halting my father right there. The sheer authority in his solid gesture made the entire front lawn fall completely silent. The chief looked directly at Richard and Diane with absolute unfiltered disgust. He stated in a loud, booming voice that absolutely nobody was getting evicted today. The smug smirk instantly melted off my mother's face. Richard's arms dropped limply to his sides. He sputtered and demanded to know what the chief meant by that statement. He yelled that he possessed the official deed to the property and had the ultimate legal right to remove any unwanted guests. The chief shook his head slowly. He pointed a stern finger at my father and declared that Richard owned absolutely nothing right here. The wealthy neighbors leaned over their property lines, straining to hear every single word of the conversation. The chief announced to the entire elite cul-de-sac that he had just reviewed the certified property deeds and financial records. He revealed that the bank had formally foreclosed on this exact estate 2 years ago due to massive unpaid debts. He stated that Richard and Diane had secretly declared catastrophic bankruptcy. The crowd of elite neighbors gasped in dramatic unison. My parents went completely rigid. Their pristine high society reputation was instantly pulverized into millions of tiny, irrecoverable broken pieces forever. Diane let out a loud, strangled gasp, clutching her throat tightly as if she could not breathe. Richard turned a sickly shade of pale green. He tried to stammer out a frantic denial, but his voice completely failed him. The chief did not show a single ounce of mercy toward them. He turned slightly and pointed directly at me. He announced loudly that Dr. Riley had swooped in and purchased the entire foreclosed estate. He made sure to emphasize that I paid the bank in pure unencumbered cash. He looked back at my parents and delivered the ultimate legal reality. The chief coldly told Richard and Diane that they were nothing but mere tenants living on the property by my extreme grace. He stated clearly that I held the absolute legal power to evict them at any given moment. Diane let out a piercing shriek and collapsed onto the damp grass. Her designer dress soaked up the muddy dew, but she did not even care. She covered her face, weeping tears of genuine agonizing humiliation. Richard stumbled backward and fell hard against the heavy hood of the police cruiser. His weak legs completely gave out under the crushing exposed lies. Jason suddenly pulled up to the curb in his least expensive black sports car. He threw the door open and sprinted across the lawn, completely panicked by the sight of his parents collapsed on the ground. He had rushed over to ensure my eviction went smoothly before his wedding rehearsal started. He froze when he saw the police chief holding the red folder and glaring directly at him. Jason looked at his weeping mother and his paralyzed father. The golden child finally realized his massive web of financial deception had collided with a solid brick wall of undeniable legal reality. Jada slammed her car door shut loudly right behind Jason. The harsh metallic crack echoed across the silent, tense lawn. She marched forward, gripping the gold-embossed wedding schedules so tightly her knuckles turned bright white. She bypassed my sobbing parents and walked straight up to Jason. Her brilliant legal mind had already pieced together the brutal, ugly truth. She glared at her fiancé with a look of pure, absolute disgust. The intense disgust of a highly intelligent woman who realized she had almost married a con artist. Jason immediately shrank back, completely terrified of her furious, dark, glaring eyes. Jada stared Jason down, refusing to break eye contact for even a single second. Her voice was ice-cold and razor-sharp, cutting through the morning air. She reminded Jason of all the arrogant stories he had spun about his elite heritage. She asked him why his wealthy parents were currently weeping on the grass of a foreclosed property. She threw the thick stack of expensive wedding schedules directly at his chest. The heavy cardstock scattered across the lawn like fallen leaves. Jada took one slow step closer and delivered her final piercing blow straight to his humiliated, lying face. "You told me this was a multi-generational family estate," she hissed. Jason opened his mouth, spin another frantic lie, but the words choked in his throat. He looked at the scattered wedding schedules and then at his utterly humiliated parents. He finally looked at me standing calmly on the porch, with absolute quiet authority. His entire fake billionaire empire had shattered into fine dust. Jada turned her back on him, completely disgusted by his pathetic silence. She marched back toward her luxury sedan without a single ounce of hesitation, leaving him totally ruined on the driveway gravel right now. Jada drove away, leaving a thick cloud of dust settling over the tense gravel driveway. Jason remained completely frozen, staring at the empty space where his wealthy future had just vanished. His knees buckled slightly. He collapsed onto the hood of his expensive leased sports car, burying his face in his trembling hands. Richard and Diane slowly pulled themselves up from the damp grass, looking like discarded trash. Their pristine high society facade was utterly destroyed. They looked at me standing on the porch with absolute quiet authority. I did not offer them a single ounce of sympathy. I simply turned my back, walked inside my home, and locked the heavy wooden door. The next 48 hours were a blur of frantic, pathetic desperation from my so-called family. Jason somehow managed to temporarily salvage his relationship with Jada. He spent hours crying on the phone, spinning a massive web of new lies to convince her that the real estate disaster was just a temporary misunderstanding caused by our parents. He threw Richard and Diane right under the bus to save his own skin. He convinced Jada to proceed with the grand wedding ceremony, promising he would explain every single financial detail after they returned from their honeymoon. Jada reluctantly agreed to walk down the aisle, but she demanded absolute transparency. Jason knew he was living on borrowed time. He knew that if Senator Winston discovered the truth about the foreclosure and the massive debt, the entire political dynasty would crush him into dust. The morning of the wedding arrived with a thick, suffocating humidity. The grand ceremony was scheduled to take place at an ultra-exclusive country club downtown. 2 hours before the limousines were supposed to arrive, my front door rattled with a frantic, desperate knock. I opened it to find Jason, Richard, and Diane standing on my porch. They did not look like the arrogant elites who had tried to have me arrested just 2 days ago. They looked absolutely terrified. Jason was already sweating through his custom-tailored tuxedo shirt. His hands were shaking so violently he had to grip the porch railing to steady himself. Diane wore a lavish designer gown, but her face was pale and drawn. Richard looked completely defeated, refusing to make direct eye contact with me. Jason dropped to his knees right there on the wooden planks. The golden child of the family swallowed every ounce of his massive pride and literally crawled toward my boots. He begged me to listen to him. He pleaded with me to keep my mouth completely shut during the wedding. He admitted that Jada was highly suspicious, and Senator Winston was already asking uncomfortable questions about his financial portfolio. Jason cried real pathetic tears, claiming that if I revealed the eviction to the wedding guests, his entire life would be violently ripped apart. He said the senator would destroy his banking career and throw him into federal prison for fraud. He grabbed the hem of my jeans, begging me for mercy. Diane stepped forward, joining her son on the ground. My mother actually knelt on the hard wooden deck, ruining her expensive silk dress. She clasped her hands together in a prayer motion, pleading for my silence. She promised they would move out of the estate the very next morning if I just let Jason get married today. She swore they would never bother me again. Richard remained standing, but he bowed his head in absolute humiliation. He mumbled a quiet, desperate apology, asking me to spare the family from total public annihilation. They were willing to trade every last shred of their dignity just to secure access to the immense wealth and political power of Jada and her father. I stared down at them, feeling an overwhelming sense of cold detachment. They were not begging for forgiveness because they felt remorse for treating me like garbage. They were only begging because they were completely terrified of facing the consequences of their own greedy actions. I looked at Jason sobbing on my porch. I thought about Jada. She was a brilliant, successful African-American woman who had worked incredibly hard to build her legal career. She came from a family of genuine public servants. She did not deserve to be chained to a narcissistic fraud who was secretly drowning in catastrophic debt. Jada was a genuinely good person who was being ruthlessly conned by a desperate coward. I knew that simply exposing Jason right now on the porch would not be enough. Jada needed to see the absolute truth for herself, surrounded by her own powerful family. She needed to understand the exact magnitude of his deception before she signed a legally binding marriage certificate. If I destroyed him right now behind closed doors, he would just spin another elaborate lie to manipulate her. The truth needed to be revealed in the brightest light possible. I slowly stepped back, forcing Jason to release his grip on my jeans. I looked directly into his panicked, sweating face. I told Jason I would attend his grand wedding. I told him I would stand quietly in the background and watch him walk down the aisle. I promised him I would not approach Senator Winston or shout the truth about the foreclosure during the ceremony. The sheer wave of relief that crashed over Jason was physically sickening. He gasped for air, thanking me profusely and promising to repay my kindness. Diane wept loudly, praising me for being a loyal sister. They completely misunderstood my intentions. They thought I was agreeing to protect their toxic secrets out of family loyalty. I looked at my parents and brother with icy calm. I told them I was not doing this for them. I was attending solely out of respect for Jada. I did not reveal my true plan. I ordered them to leave my property right now and go to the venue. I shut the door, leaving them absolutely speechless outside. The drive to the exclusive downtown country club took less than 30 minutes. I navigated my simple sedan through the massive wrought iron gates, passing rows of luxury vehicles and valet attendants. The venue was an architectural masterpiece of white marble and soaring glass windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Wealthy guests mingled on the perfectly manicured lawns, sipping expensive champagne and adjusting their designer outfits. I parked my car myself, avoiding the valet line completely. I walked up the grand stone steps, wearing the same simple black dress from the rehearsal dinner. I had promised my brother I would attend his wedding, and I always keep my promises. I stepped into the massive reception hall and immediately blended into the shadows near the towering floral arrangements. I watched my parents working the room. Richard and Diane had somehow recovered their arrogant posture. They smiled brightly and shook hands with powerful politicians and wealthy investors, acting as if they were the true masters of this elite universe. They completely ignored my arrival. They wanted me invisible, and I was perfectly happy to oblige. I watched Jada from a distance. She stood near the grand staircase looking absolutely breathtaking in a stunning custom white gown. Her father, Senator Winston, stood proudly beside her, greeting his distinguished colleagues. Jada carried herself with absolute grace, but I could see the slight tension in her jaw. She was a brilliant woman who knew something was fundamentally wrong with her fiancé. She was just waiting for the final piece of the puzzle to drop. I slowly made my way toward the back corridors of the country club, aiming for the quiet hallways away from the bustling crowd. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps as I navigated the winding passages. The long corridor leading to the private bridal and groom suites was lined with antique mirrors and soft golden lighting. I wanted to find a quiet corner to wait until the ceremony officially began. As I turned the corner, I heard the harsh, frantic voice of my brother, echoing down the empty hall. Jason was standing outside the heavy oak doors of the groom suite. He was aggressively cornering a young woman holding a massive professional camera. She was the lead wedding photographer hired to document the perfect union of two powerful families. Jason had backed her against the floral wallpaper, pointing a shaking finger directly at her face. I was sweating profusely, ruining his crisp white collar. His custom-tailored tuxedo looked suffocating on his rigid frame. He was vibrating with a toxic mixture of panic and pure narcissistic rage. I stepped back quickly, hiding myself behind a large marble pillar. I held my breath and listened to his vicious commands. Jason demanded the photographer completely alter the family portrait schedule. He ordered her to memorize my face and ensure I was never captured in a single frame of footage. He aggressively described my simple black dress and my plain appearance. He told the frightened photographer that I was a complete disgrace to his elite image. He warned her that if I accidentally walked into the background of a shot, she was required to edit me out immediately. He spat the words out like toxic venom. He called me an embarrassment and a complete loser. He told the young woman that I was absolutely disgusting filth who did not belong in the same room as Senator Winston. He claimed I was a pathetic charity case who was trying to ruin his flawless reputation. He ordered the photographer to physically block me if I tried to stand next to his parents during the official family portraits. He said his wedding album needed to reflect absolute perfection, and my presence would permanently stain his legacy. The young photographer nodded her head, frantically clutching her expensive camera very tightly against her chest. She promised to follow his exact orders and keep me out of every single photograph. She was clearly terrified of losing her lucrative contract with the wealthy family. Jason let out a sharp, aggressive breath and adjusted his silk tie. He told her to get out of his sight and start doing her job. The photographer hurried down the opposite end of the hallway, escaping his wrath. Jason stood alone in the corridor, believing he had successfully contained the threat of my existence. He let out a loud, arrogant sigh and turned around to head back into his private suite. He froze completely. The heavy oak door of the groom's suite had been pushed wide open. Standing perfectly still in the doorframe was Liam. The former Army Ranger and designated best man was fully dressed in his matching tailored tuxedo. Liam had stepped out of the room during Jason's vicious rant. He had stood in the quiet hallway and listened to every single hateful word my brother just spewed. The expression on the face of the veteran soldier was absolutely terrifying. His jaw was clenched so tightly the muscles visibly ticked beneath his skin. His eyes were cold, dark, and filled with pure, unfiltered disgust. He stared at Jason with the intense, calculating gaze of a trained combat specialist, identifying a hostile threat. Jason swallowed hard, his arrogant posture instantly crumbling under the deadly stare of his best man. He tried to force a fake friendly laugh, waving his hands dismissively. He told Liam he was just managing some very stressful family drama before the big ceremony. He attempted to clap Liam on the shoulder, calling him a good friend. Liam did not move a single inch. He did not accept the friendly gesture. He simply looked at the man he had agreed to stand beside at the altar. The heavy silence in the corridor was deafening. Jason opened his mouth to spin another frantic lie, but the sheer intensity of Liam's silent judgment suffocated the words right in his throat, causing him to completely choke on his own massive and overwhelming fear. Liam did not break his intense stare. He reached up with slow, deliberate movements and gripped the expensive white floral boutonniere pinned to the lapel of his tailored tuxedo. He ripped the silk fabric slightly as he tore the flower away from his chest. He crushed the delicate white petals within his large, muscular fist. Jason took a hesitant step backward, holding his hands up in a weak defensive gesture. Liam threw the crushed flower directly at the center of my brother. The ruined blossom bounced off his crisp white shirt and fell onto the patterned carpet. Jason stammered out a pathetic apology, claiming the wedding stress was making him say crazy things. He begged his best man to understand the intense pressure of marrying into such a prestigious political family. Liam shook his head slowly. The sheer disgust radiating from the veteran soldier was absolute. He stepped out of the groom's suite and fully into the corridor. At that exact moment, the heavy wooden doors at the far end of the hallway swung open. Jada stepped into the corridor accompanied by her father, Senator Winston. She had been searching for Jason to clarify a minor scheduling detail. She froze completely when she saw the crushed flower on the floor and the terrifying expression on the face of the best man. She immediately sensed the hostility radiating in the air. Jada demanded to know what was happening. Jason spun around, completely terrified by the sudden appearance of his beautiful fiancée and her powerful father. He frantically tried to intercept them, blocking their path with wide, sweeping arm gestures. He let out a loud, nervous "f," declaring it was just a silly disagreement between nervous groomsmen. Liam did not let him control the narrative for a single second. The soldier completely bypassed my brother and addressed Jada directly. His deep voice echoed clearly down the luxurious hallway, leaving no room for misinterpretation. He pointed a steady finger right at Jason. He told Jada that she was about to marry a man who had just commanded a photographer to erase his own sister from family history. He revealed that Jason had violently referred to his sister as disgusting filth who did not belong in this venue. Jada gasped, her eyes darting toward Jason in pure shock. Senator Winston straightened his posture, his sharp political instincts instantly assessing the severe gravity of the situation. Jason frantically waved his hands, screaming that Liam was lying. He shouted that his sister was just a pathetic, jobless squatter who constantly ruined his life. He begged Jada not to listen to a crazy soldier who had obviously drank too much champagne. Liam stepped closer, completely dominating the physical space. He silenced my brother with one single terrifying look. He turned back to Jada and her father. He announced to the entire corridor exactly who the supposed jobless sister really was. He stated my name with deep, unwavering respect. He revealed that I was not a failure or a burden. I was a highly decorated special operations combat surgeon. He told them I had served multiple classified tours in the Middle East, operating in the most dangerous combat zones on the entire planet. Jada covered her mouth with her hand. Senator Winston stared at Liam, his military background instantly recognizing the immense weight of that revelation. Jason stood completely paralyzed, his jaw hanging open as his entire fake reality shattered. He had spent years telling everyone I was a useless loser. Now a decorated ranger was exposing my true identity right in front of the most important people in his life. Liam did not stop there. He wanted to completely obliterate my brother. He described the jagged burn scar running up my left arm. He told them Jason had mocked that injury, claiming I had burned myself cooking instant noodles. Liam set the record straight with absolute brutal honesty. He revealed that the scar came from an improvised explosive device in Syria. He explained that I had thrown my own body over a wounded soldier, shielding him from the intense blast. He told Jada that I had taken the shrapnel and the fire so that others could live. He stated that I had saved his life and the lives of his entire platoon under heavy enemy fire. The silence in the hallway was incredibly heavy. Jada looked at Jason with an expression of pure, absolute revulsion. She was looking at a complete monster. Senator Winston glared at my brother with a level of contempt reserved for the lowest forms of treason. Jason looked around frantically, realizing he was completely trapped. He tried to reach out to Jada, but she instantly recoiled as if he was covered in toxic waste. Liam delivered his final devastating blow. He looked Jason directly in the eyes. He told my brother that he was a pathetic, cowardly fraud. He stated clearly that Jason was not fit to breathe the same air as me, let alone claim superiority over me. He announced that he would rather walk through a minefield than stand next to a man with absolutely zero honor. Liam turned his back on my brother completely. He walked down the corridor, passing Jada and the senator with a respectful nod. He pushed through the heavy wooden doors and walked out of the venue, abandoning his role as best man without a single ounce of regret. Jason dropped to his knees on the carpet. He reached his hands out toward Jada, sobbing hysterically and begging for her forgiveness. He claimed he was just stressed and overwhelmed by the elite wedding planning. Jada did not offer him sympathy. She saw right through his pathetic tears. She signaled her coordinator and demanded an immediate delay to the schedule. She grabbed her father, marching directly into the nearest private conference room, locking the heavy doors securely inside. Jason remained weeping over the crushed flower, totally ruined, as his entire future collapsed right in front of him. The oak doors of the private conference room finally swung open. Jada emerged into the hallway alongside her father. Her face was completely devoid of emotion. She looked like a marble statue, standing tall and resolute. Senator Winston kept his posture rigid, his sharp eyes scanning the corridor. Jason scrambled up from the patterned carpet, wiping his tear-stained face with the back of his trembling hand. He tried to reach out to his bride, but she smoothly sidestepped his desperate grasp. She did not offer him a warm smile or a word of comfort. She informed him the ceremony would proceed as scheduled. She stated that too many powerful political figures and elite socialites were waiting in the grand ballroom to cancel the event without causing a massive public scandal. Jason let out a loud gasp of pure relief. He wrongly assumed walking down the aisle meant he had dodged catastrophic ruin. He failed to recognize the icy detachment in her eyes. He thought he could manipulate the situation and secure her family wealth. The wedding ceremony passed in a surreal blur. The massive ballroom was adorned with thousands of white roses and dripping crystal chandeliers. The string quartet played a beautiful classical melody, but the atmosphere felt incredibly tense. Jada walked down the aisle looking absolutely flawless, but her voice was flat when she recited her vows. She did not shed a single tear of joy. Jason sweated profusely under the bright venue lights. His tailored tuxedo jacket was visibly damp across his shoulders. He rushed through his vows, stumbling over his words as he tried to project an image of a confident, wealthy groom. My parents sat in the front row, beaming with oblivious pride. Richard and Diane clapped loudly, completely unaware of the explosive confrontation that had just occurred in the back hallway. I remained hidden in the shadows near the back of the venue, observing the entire fake spectacle. I knew Jada was a highly intelligent corporate lawyer. She was not a woman who would simply ignore the terrifying revelations Liam had just exposed. She was calculating her next move with absolute precision. The grand reception immediately followed the tense ceremony. Hundreds of elite guests moved into the main banquet hall, sipping expensive champagne and mingling around the towering floral centerpieces. The jazz band started playing an upbeat tune, trying to elevate the mood of the room. Jason grabbed a fresh glass of champagne and downed it in one single gulp. He wiped his sweating forehead with a white linen napkin. He looked around the massive room, noticing the wealthy politicians and influential defense contractors talking with Senator Winston. He knew he was standing on incredibly thin ice. He needed to perform massive damage control right now. He needed to convince Jada and her powerful father that he was not a cowardly fraud. He needed to rewrite the narrative and paint himself as a brilliant, selfless hero. Jason signaled the event coordinator, waving his hand aggressively to cut the music. The jazz band abruptly stopped playing. The sudden silence caused a ripple of confusion to spread across the crowded banquet hall. Jason marched over to the main stage and grabbed the microphone from the microphone stand. The feedback whined sharply, causing several guests to cover their ears. Jason tapped the microphone, testing the sound before flashing a wide, desperate smile at the audience. He welcomed everyone to the reception, projecting his voice to sound booming and authoritative. He thanked Senator Winston for his generous hospitality and praised Jada for her stunning beauty. He then took a deep breath, gripping the microphone tightly. He announced that he wanted to share a very special story with all of his distinguished guests. He claimed it was a story about family loyalty and incredible financial success. I watched him from my dark corner, knowing exactly what he was about to do. Jason pointed his finger toward the center of the room, acting as if he was filled with immense pride. He began spinning a massive, elaborate lie to save his own skin. He told the crowd that everyone knew he was a highly successful investment banker managing millions of dollars. He bragged about his keen eye for lucrative startups and innovative technology. Then he lowered his voice, trying to sound incredibly humble and deeply emotional. He announced that his greatest investment was not a typical corporate venture. He told the silent room that he was the secret anonymous angel investor who had single-handedly funded my company. He boldly claimed that he had built Aegis Medical Tech from the ground up using his own massive personal wealth. He spun a ridiculous fictional tale about how I had returned from my military service completely broken and utterly lost. He painted me as a helpless, traumatized veteran who needed a strong, wealthy patriarch to rescue her. He claimed he had spent countless hours guiding my business decisions and providing the millions of dollars in capital required to launch a defense technology firm. He told the elite guests that he had deliberately kept his name off the official corporate documents because he wanted me to have all the public glory. He said he was a selfless brother who only cared about family success. Jason smiled directly at Senator Winston, hoping the powerful man would buy this garbage. He stated that Aegis Medical Tech recently securing a billion-dollar defense contract was the direct result of his brilliant financial strategy. He claimed he was the true mastermind pulling all the strings behind the scenes. He tried to present himself as a wealthy titan of industry who possessed the exact elite pedigree required to marry into the Winston political dynasty. He raised his champagne glass high into the air, proposing a toast to his own fabricated generosity. My parents nodded along, completely validating his insane public deception. Jason stood on the stage, sweating and smiling honestly, believing he had just won the entire game. Jada walked toward the stage with incredibly steady and very measured steps. Her custom white gown glided across the hardwood floor of the banquet hall. She did not look like a blushing bride overwhelmed by her new husband. She looked like a trained prosecutor approaching a hostile witness. The reception room fell quiet as the guests watched her ascend the wooden staircase. Jason turned toward her with a massive and overly triumphant smile. He reached out to wrap his arm around her waist, ready to bask in the glory of his fabricated success. Jada evaded his touch. She reached out and took the microphone out of his hand. Jason blinked in utter confusion, but kept his fake smile plastered tightly across his face. He stepped back, assuming his bride wanted to publicly thank him for his generosity. He expected her to gush about his business mind. He expected her to validate every lie he had spun to the VIP crowd. Jada did not thank him. She did not even look at him. She turned her gaze toward the hundreds of wealthy politicians and defense contractors seated around the centerpieces. She held the microphone with absolute confidence and a posture of pure authority. She signaled the event coordinator standing near the controls at the back of the room. The overhead lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly. The projector screen slowly descended from the ceiling directly behind the stage. The gathered guests murmured softly in anticipation. Everyone assumed they were about to watch a photo montage detailing the love story of the couple. They expected to see curated images of beach vacations and expensive dinner dates. The projector flared to life, casting a light across the stage. A loud gasp echoed through the reception hall. The screen did not display a photograph. It did not show smiling faces or sunset proposals. Instead, the screen flashed high-resolution images of bank statements. Spreadsheets filled with massive columns of red numbers appeared for everyone to see clearly in the darkened room. The display shifted to show complex legal documents bearing official bank seals. Jason spun around to look at the screen. The smile instantly vanished from his face. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a ghost. He stared at the projection of his hidden financial ruin. He saw the account numbers he had tried to conceal. He saw the negative balances. He saw the margin calls. He saw the proof of his bankruptcy displayed in high definition for the most powerful people in the city to witness with their own eyes. Jada raised the microphone. Her voice cut through the silence of the banquet hall like a razor blade. She addressed the silent crowd with pure icy detachment. She thanked everyone for listening to the ridiculous story her groom had just delivered. She stated that her legal team had been working behind the scenes since the rehearsal dinner. She announced to the VIP crowd that her lawyers had just finished an audit of his financial portfolio. The screen clicked to a new slide. It showed a loan agreement application. The document requested $2 million. Jada pointed at the screen. She announced that Jason did not fund Aegis Medical Tech. She stated that he had zero involvement in the creation or the funding of the defense company. She revealed the absolutely undeniable truth to the room. Jason had forged the signature of his own sister to secure an illegal loan. The wealthy guests began whispering among themselves in shock. Senator Winston stood up from his table, his face twisted into a mask of fury. Jada did not stop there. She wanted to dismantle the fraud standing next to her. She told the crowd that Jason did not just forge a signature. He had used the forged documents to take out that $2 million loan against the Winston Family Political Trust. He had attempted to steal from a former Deputy Secretary of Defense to cover his massive personal debts. Jason stumbled backward, gripping the podium to keep his legs from collapsing under his weight. He stammered into the air, trying to deny the evidence glowing right behind his head. He claimed the documents were fake. He shouted that someone was trying to frame him and destroy his reputation. He begged Jada to turn off the projector and listen to him in private. Jada ignored his pleas. She clicked a remote in her hand and the screen shifted again, revealing even more evidence of his deception. The display now showed a comparison of signatures. On the left was the authentic signature of the founder of Aegis. On the right was the forgery Jason had submitted to the lenders. Jada explained the forensic analysis confirming the fraud. She stripped away every lie he had told. She exposed his fake wealth, his fake success, and his fake family loyalty. She laid his entire pathetic reality completely bare for the whole world to finally judge. Richard and Diane sat frozen in their seats at the table. My mother covered her face with her napkins, sobbing in humiliation. The socialites she had spent years trying to impress were now staring at her with disgust. My father gripped the wooden edge of the dinner table so hard his tight knuckles turned bone white. He finally realized his golden child was a criminal who had just attempted to defraud one of the dynasties in the country. Jada turned to look at Jason. The disgust radiating from her was chilling. She told him he was a monster. She stated that he had planned to use her family wealth to bury his illegal actions. She called him a thief who tried to sacrifice his own sister to save his ego. Jason dropped to his knees on the stage. He begged for mercy, crying tears of terror. He knew his life was over. The beautiful wedding reception had rapidly transformed into a brutal public execution of his character and future. Senator Winston did not say a single word to the weeping coward on the stage. The veteran politician slowly stood up from his prominent seat at the head table. He adjusted the lapels of his custom suit with absolute chilling precision. He looked down at Jason kneeling on the hardwood floor, and his eyes held nothing but supreme judgment. He raised his right hand slightly and delivered a sharp, decisive nod toward the heavy mahogany doors at the very back of the grand ballroom. The heavy doors immediately swung open, crashing loudly against the ornate walls. A team of stern-looking men and women marched purposefully into the opulent reception hall. They did not look like wedding guests. They wore sharp, dark suits and carried an air of absolute, unwavering authority. Silver badges gleamed under the bright light of the crystal chandeliers. These were financial crimes detectives from the Federal Bureau, and they moved with strict tactical efficiency. The music had stopped completely. The only sound in the massive room was the heavy synchronized thud of their tactical shoes marching across the polished floor. Jason snapped his head toward the entrance. The tears streaming down his flushed face instantly dried up, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. He realized the senator had orchestrated this entire public takedown. He scrambled backward, awkwardly tangling his expensive dress shoes in the long white fabric of the stage skirting. He managed to pull himself up, staggering down the wooden steps of the platform. He darted wildly toward the center of the room, trying to find an escape route through the massive crowd of elite attendees. He pushed past wealthy investors and powerful defense contractors, hoping to reach the side exit near the catering kitchen. The VIP guests did not help him. They physically stepped away from him, treating him like a highly infectious disease. They pulled their expensive gowns and tailored jackets out of his frantic path, leaving a wide, empty circle right in the middle of the dance floor. Jason spun around, desperately panting like a hunted animal. He was completely trapped under the bright spotlight of the main dance floor. The lead detective stepped forward, breaking the perimeter. He held up a federal warrant, displaying it clearly for my brother to see. He announced the charges in a booming voice that echoed off the high vaulted ceiling. He declared that Jason was officially under arrest for massive wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery. He explicitly stated that Jason had illegally utilized classified political trust accounts and fraudulent signatures to secure multi-million-dollar loans. The ballroom immediately erupted into a chaotic symphony of loud gasps and shocked whispers. High society elites covered their mouths, buzzing with the scandalous details of the explosive arrest. Powerful politicians whispered rapidly to their aides, ordering them to instantly sever all financial ties with my family. My parents remained entirely paralyzed at their assigned table. Richard stared blankly at his empty champagne glass, his entire reputation completely eviscerated. Diane finally realized her perfect golden child was actually a reckless criminal who was about to spend decades locked inside a federal prison cell. She opened her mouth to scream, but her throat constricted, rendering her totally mute. Two detectives flanked Jason, grabbing his arms with firm professional grips. They forcefully turned him around, spinning him away from the stunned crowd. Jason tried to thrash and pull his arms free, yelling that he was a highly respected investment banker. The detectives completely ignored his pathetic resistance. They forced his wrists behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs locking securely into place resonated across the silent dance floor. The sharp sound marked the absolute definitive end of his fraudulent empire. The lead detective began reciting his Miranda rights loudly, ensuring every single word penetrated his panicked brain. Jason sagged against the firm grip of the federal agents. His custom-bespoke tuxedo was rumpled and soaked with nervous sweat. He looked like an absolute disaster. He turned his head desperately, trying to make eye contact with Jada one last time. He wanted her to save him. Jada simply turned her back on him, stepping closer to her powerful father. She had completely detached herself from the monster she almost married. I watched the entire brutal scene unfold from the dark shadows near the towering floral arrangements. I felt an incredible surge of pure vindication washing over my chest. Jason had spent his entire life pushing me down to elevate his fake status. He had stolen my medical blueprints, attempting to ruin my company and steal my hard-earned wealth. He had mocked my military service and called me a disgusting burden. Now he was the one being dragged away in chains, facing absolute public destruction. The wealthy crowd watched with morbid fascination as the detectives marched my brother across the polished hardwood floor. The elite guests parted like the Red Sea, allowing the federal agents clear passage toward the grand exit. Jason hung his head in total defeat, finally comprehending the massive catastrophic scale of his failure. The doors slammed shut, sealing his fate. The hall remained engulfed in stunned silence. Senator Winston stepped forward, taking the microphone from his daughter. He addressed the crowd with smooth political grace, apologizing for the unexpected disruption to the evening. He assured the guests that justice had prevailed and invited them to enjoy the food. The guests slowly resumed their conversations, though the volume was much lower. Everyone was analyzing the incredible downfall of the fake billionaire. I kept my eyes fixed on my parents, sitting completely frozen. They had lost everything they valued in a matter of minutes. Their golden child was headed to a maximum security prison facility. Their connection to the Winston dynasty was permanently severed. They were utterly exposed as the enablers of a massive criminal fraud. I took a deep, calming breath and stepped out of the shadows, ready to confront them one final time. I stepped out from behind the towering floral arrangements and walked directly toward the head table. My low heels clicked softly against the polished hardwood floor, cutting through the lingering murmurs of the stunned reception crowd. The remaining guests parted for me, forming a wide path. They had just watched a bride dismantle her groom and federal agents drag him away. Now they watched the mysterious sister approach the shattered parents. Richard and Diane were still sitting at their assigned table, surrounded by half-empty champagne flutes and untouched plates of expensive caviar. They looked like hollow statues. My father was staring blankly at the empty space on the stage where his golden child had just been destroyed. My mother was hyperventilating, clutching her expensive silk napkin against her chest. I stopped right in front of their table. The shadow I cast fell directly over their untouched food. Diane slowly raised her head. Her perfectly styled hair was coming undone, and her mascara was smeared down her pale cheeks. She looked at me, and the reality of my true identity finally shattered the massive wall of her stubborn delusion. She realized I was the only lifeline they had left in this entire world. Diane let out a loud, agonizing wail that echoed across the quiet ballroom. She pushed her chair back violently, causing it to tip over and crash against the floor. She lunged forward, falling entirely to her knees right in front of me. Her lavish mother of the groom gown pooled around her on the hardwood floor, soaking up spilled wine. She threw her arms forward and grabbed my legs with a desperate, bruising grip. She buried her tear-stained face against my knees, sobbing hysterically. She begged me to save her perfect son. She screamed that I had the money to fix this massive disaster. She shouted to the entire room that I was a billionaire CEO who could easily make all of this disappear. She pleaded with me to write a check for $2 million and pay off the fraudulent loan before Jason reached the federal detention center. She claimed that the authorities would drop all the criminal charges if the massive debt was simply paid in full today. She begged me to call my corporate lawyers and launch an immediate rescue mission. She told me Jason would die in a maximum security prison without my financial help. Richard finally snapped out of his catatonic shock. He slid out of his chair and collapsed onto his knees right next to his weeping wife. The proud, arrogant patriarch of the family was now kneeling on the floor of a banquet hall, begging the daughter he had abused for decades. He looked up at me with red, bloodshot eyes. He told me they were deeply sorry for everything they had ever done to me. He promised they would treat me with absolute respect and give me the family loyalty I always deserved. He swore they would force Jason to apologize on his hands and knees every single day for the rest of his miserable life. I stood perfectly still, feeling the heavy weight of their desperate hands gripping my simple black dress. I looked down at the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless and invisible. They were not apologizing because they suddenly realized my immense value as a human being. They were only begging because my bank account was suddenly large enough to shield them from the severe consequences of their own toxic greed. Their tears were absolutely hollow and completely meaningless to me now. I reached down with slow, deliberate movements. I did not jerk away or show a single ounce of emotional distress. I gripped my mother by her wrists. Her hands were cold and shaking violently. I forcefully peeled her desperate fingers off my legs one by one. I pushed her hands away, letting her slump back onto her heels. I looked directly into her frantic, weeping eyes. My voice was calm, cold, and projected loud enough for the lingering elite guests to hear every single word. I told her I could easily buy the entire federal bank that held his fraudulent debt. I told her I could write a check for $2 million right now without even checking my corporate balance. But I stated very clearly that no amount of money in the world could ever buy this family a moral compass. I looked at my father kneeling helplessly beside her. I told them I had already paid their massive debts when I bought their foreclosed estate in pure cash. I explained that I paid off your foreclosed house to repay you for raising me. We are officially even right now. I told them my massive financial success was built on pure honor and sacrifice, while their fake empire was built entirely on disgusting lies. I stated that Jason made his own criminal choices, and he would absolutely serve his full time behind heavy steel bars. I refused to spend a single penny of my own hard-earned wealth to save a monster from his own devastating actions. I told Diane she needed to stop crying and start packing her bags, because the eviction notice for the guest house was now applying to the entire main estate. I gave them exactly 30 days to vacate my property before I sent my armed security team to physically remove them. Diane let out a final piercing scream, collapsing completely flat against the hardwood floor. Richard buried his face in his hands, weeping with total absolute defeat. They had finally realized the absolute finality of my words. There was absolutely no negotiation, and there was no second chance for redemption. I stepped back away from their pathetic forms. I turned my back on my parents, leaving them completely shattered on the cold floor of the empty banquet hall, to face their ruined future entirely alone in the darkness. I walked away from my parents without a single ounce of hesitation. My low heels clicked steadily against the polished floor, leading me toward the grand exit of the reception hall. The massive room was rapidly emptying as the wealthy elite scrambled to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. Near the main entrance, the federal detectives were tightly securing their grip on Jason. I paused near a towering ice sculpture to watch the final moments of his absolute downfall. The lead detective pushed my brother forward, forcing him to walk the humiliating path toward the waiting police vehicles outside. Their route took them directly past the extravagant wedding cake positioned elegantly in the center of the foyer. The cake was an absolute masterpiece of white fondant and spun sugar, designed to represent a sweet and prosperous future. Jason stumbled slightly as he passed the dessert table, his expensive leather shoes scuffing the floor. He turned his head and stared at the untouched cake for a fleeting second. The contrast between his rumpled, sweat-soaked tuxedo and the pristine white frosting was incredibly stark. He looked completely pathetic with his hands bound tightly behind his back in heavy steel cuffs. The federal agents did not allow him to linger. They shoved him toward the heavy glass doors. A few lingering guests held up their smartphones, capturing the exact moment the fake billionaire walked out of his own high society wedding. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind him, sealing his criminal fate and physically removing him from the elite world he had desperately tried to conquer. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air of the foyer fill my lungs. The toxic presence of my brother was finally gone. I adjusted my simple black dress and prepared to leave the country club. Before I could reach the front entrance, a clear, authoritative voice called out my name. I turned around and saw Jada walking toward me. She had left her father speaking with the venue manager and approached me completely alone. She did not look like a heartbroken bride mourning a lost relationship. She looked like a powerful corporate lawyer who had just successfully amputated a severely infected limb. Her white custom gown flowed beautifully behind her, but her posture was strictly business. Jada stopped 2 feet in front of me and extended her right hand. I looked at her perfectly manicured fingers and then met her incredibly sharp gaze. I reached out and shook her hand firmly. Her grip was strong and completely steady, showing absolutely no signs of emotional distress. Jada looked me directly in the eyes and offered a sincere expression of gratitude. She thanked me for showing up today, even when my toxic family tried to keep me hidden in the shadows. She stated that if I had not triggered the rapid collapse of his financial lies, she might have actually signed the legally binding marriage documents. She told me that discovering the forged signatures and the stolen medical blueprints was the exact catalyst her legal team needed to completely expose his massive fraud. Jada thanked me for inadvertently saving her from a disastrous marriage. She acknowledged my military service and my incredible success with Aegis Medical Tech, expressing deep professional respect for everything I had built from the ground up. I nodded slowly, accepting her genuine gratitude. I told Jada that she was an incredibly brilliant woman who deserved far better than the pathetic coward who just left in handcuffs. I assured her that her political family would easily recover from this brief public scandal because they possessed genuine integrity and authentic power. Jada offered a small, tight smile of agreement. She stated that her father was already launching a massive public relations campaign to completely distance the Winston dynasty from the criminal actions of my brother. She promised me that her family would ensure Jason faced the absolute maximum penalty under federal law for attempting to defraud their political trust. We shared a final look of mutual respect before she turned around and walked back toward her father. She was completely ready to move forward with her successful life, leaving the wreckage of my family entirely in her rearview mirror. She deserved a future built on absolute truth, and I knew she would achieve immense greatness without him dragging her down. The brief connection we shared today was born from absolute chaos, but it remained firmly grounded in profound mutual respect and understanding. I cast one final glance back into the grand ballroom. The luxurious reception hall was now almost completely abandoned. The jazz band had packed up their expensive instruments and fled through the service exit. The catering staff was already moving through the room, clearing away the expensive champagne flutes and untouched plates of Wagyu beef. In the very center of the massive room, Richard and Diane remained completely paralyzed on the floor. They were literally being swept around by the annoyed venue staff. A waiter casually rolled a heavy garbage bin right past my weeping mother, tossing discarded napkins into it without offering her a single glance of pity. Richard stared blankly at the ceiling, completely stripped of his arrogant patriarchal authority. Diane continued to sob into her hands, mourning the absolute destruction of her pristine social image. They had gambled their entire existence on a golden child who turned out to be a massive criminal liability. They had violently pushed away the only daughter who could have genuinely protected them. Now they were completely alone in an empty rented hall facing absolute ruin. They had lost their favorite son to the federal prison system. They had permanently lost their connection to the affluent Winston family. And most devastatingly, they had exactly 30 days before they were legally evicted from the only home they had left. I turned my back on the pathetic scene and walked out the front doors of the country club. The evening air felt incredibly crisp. The heavy, suffocating chains of my toxic family were finally broken forever, and I was completely free to build my own legacy. I descended the grand stone steps of the country club, leaving the opulent nightmare completely behind me. The crisp evening breeze swept across the manicured lawns, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine and distant city rain. I took a deep breath, letting the clean air fill my lungs. For the first time in 32 years, I did not feel the crushing weight of my parents' expectations or the toxic shadow of my brother looming over my shoulders. I was entirely untethered. The valet attendants were busy rushing around the circular driveway, fetching luxury vehicles for the fleeing elite guests. I completely bypassed the chaotic scramble near the valet stand. I walked confidently toward the far edge of the driveway where the lighting was slightly dimmer. I knew exactly who was waiting for me. Parked silently along the curb were three massive armored sport utility vehicles. Their dark-tinted windows and heavy reinforced frames stood in stark contrast to the delicate luxury sedans driven by the wedding guests. The hazard lights flashed in a steady, synchronized rhythm, cutting through the evening shadows. Standing beside the rear door of the lead vehicle was Liam. The veteran Army Ranger had shed his formal wedding attire. I had discarded the restrictive tailored tuxedo jacket and ripped off the silk bow tie. He stood tall in a simple black dress shirt, with the sleeves rolled up revealing his strong forearms. He looked completely relaxed and entirely in his element. He was no longer the conflicted best man forced to stand beside a cowardly fraud. He was a soldier standing guard for someone he genuinely respected. As I approached the convoy, Liam turned his head and locked eyes with me. The intense, terrifying glare he had directed at my brother earlier was completely gone. It was replaced by a warm, genuine smile that reached all the way to his eyes. He stood at ease, resting his hand lightly on the heavy door handle of the armored vehicle. He did not ask me if I was okay. He did not offer empty platitudes or fake sympathy. He already knew I was more than okay. He knew I had just executed a flawless tactical victory against an enemy that had tormented me for decades. Liam opened the heavy reinforced door for me, nodding his head in a gesture of profound respect. He welcomed me back to the real world. He informed me that the security detail was fully prepped and the secure flight route to Washington was completely cleared. I paused for a fraction of a second before stepping into the vehicle. I looked past Liam and acknowledged the other members of the security detail standing quietly near the convoy. I recognized their faces instantly. They were my former brothers and sisters in arms. They were the highly trained tactical operators who had served alongside me in the most dangerous combat zones on Earth. They had traded their desert camouflage for dark corporate security suits, but their absolute loyalty remained entirely unchanged. They gave me sharp, respectful nods, silently acknowledging the bond we shared. This was my actual family. These were the people who had bled with me, fought for me, and protected me when the world was burning around us. They did not care about elite social status or fake corporate wealth. They only cared about honor and survival. I returned their respectful nods and climbed into the back seat of the armored vehicle. The thick leather seats offered a comforting embrace. Liam closed the heavy door behind me, sealing me inside a quiet, secure fortress. The heavy thud of the door locking into place sounded like a massive vault closing permanently on my traumatic past. Liam climbed into the front passenger seat and gave a quick hand signal to the driver. The powerful engine roared to life with a deep mechanical growl. The three armored vehicles pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging seamlessly into a tight tactical formation. We glided down the long, winding driveway of the country club, leaving the pristine, manicured lawns and the shattered fake billionaires entirely in the rearview mirror. I leaned back against the comfortable headrest and looked out the dark-tinted window. The bright lights of the country club slowly faded into the distance, eventually disappearing completely behind the tall wrought iron gates. I did not feel a single ounce of regret. I did not feel any lingering sadness for the people I had left weeping on the ballroom floor. Richard and Diane had made their choices. Jason had dug his own grave. They would have to live with the devastating consequences of their toxic greed for the rest of their miserable lives. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and checked my secure messages. The executive board of Aegis Medical Tech was waiting for my arrival. The Defense Department officials were finalizing the paperwork for the billion-dollar technology contract. My revolutionary combat trauma kits were going to save thousands of lives, and my company was about to become a global powerhouse. The convoy merged onto the highway, accelerating rapidly toward the private airfield. The bright city lights blurred into long streaks of golden color. I looked at the jagged blast scar running up my left forearm. The violent injury used to be a source of painful memories, but tonight it looked like a badge of absolute honor. It was the physical proof that I had survived the worst the world could throw at me and emerged completely victorious. I had walked through fire to save my chosen family, and I had walked through fire to destroy the people who tried to break me. I was Dr. Riley, a decorated combat veteran and a billionaire chief executive officer. I had a massive empire to run and a brilliant future to build. Family is not always defined by shared blood or legal birth certificates. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the ones who try to destroy you the most. True family is built on a foundation of mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and absolute honesty. It is forged in the fires of shared hardship and genuine sacrifice. I found my real family on a shattered battlefield in Syria, and I brought them home with me to build a brighter future. We were speeding toward a private jet ready to conquer the world together. Thank you for listening to my story today. If you have ever been the scapegoat in a toxic family, I want you to know that your current situation is not your final destination. You have the power to walk away from the people who drag you down. You have the strength to build a beautiful, successful life, completely on your own terms. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if this journey resonated with you. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that they are strong enough to break the chains of family toxicity. Let me know in the comments below how you found your chosen family. Remember that your absolute best days are still ahead of you, and nobody has the right to steal your light. Keep fighting for your peace, and never let anyone make you feel small again. The road ahead is wide open, and the journey is entirely yours to command. The story of Riley and her toxic family offers a powerful lesson. True family is not defined by shared blood, but by unwavering loyalty, mutual respect, and genuine support. For years, Riley's biological relatives viewed her through a lens of extreme prejudice, dismissing her sacrifices as a combat surgeon while prioritizing a fabricated social image. Their cruel betrayal culminated when Jason attempted to steal her hard-earned life work to save his own fraudulent empire. However, Riley's ultimate triumph beautifully reveals that we are never obligated to endure abuse simply because of biological connections. She found her authentic family in the people who bravely stood by her during her darkest moments, like Liam and her former military team. They provided the unconditional respect her parents completely failed to offer. This narrative reminds us that we possess the immense strength to walk away from those who systematically diminish our true worth. We have the absolute right to build a chosen family rooted in honesty. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to protect your peace, please share your story with us in the comments below, and always remember to boldly prioritize your own healing journey today.